Well, good morning and welcome to Copernicus. My name is Sarah and I'm so happy you're here today. For those of you who don't know, Copernicus is a Bible study. We meet on Sunday mornings, 10 a.m. for about an hour, and anytime you can be here with us live or on replay, we love to have you. We understand that sometimes you are at your own church or watching online, so anytime you can get back here with us, we love for you to be here. Let us know you're here now or later. That way we can just say hey and connect in that way. So y'all, today we are in week 2 of a 4-week series on Ruth. Now, if you remember last week, I told you this is really my favorite book of the Bible. My favorite story of the Bible is so good. And every time that we hear it, you know, we learn new things, and that is true this time around as well. I wound up learning something new last week that I wanted to tell you about. So, you know, we got to the point where Naomi told Orpah and Ruth to go back to their families, find new husbands, and start a new life. And they had to make a decision. Well, Orpah, she chose to go back to, you know, her family and start all over. But Ruth said no, she wasn't going to do it. And I never considered the fact that Ruth chose to go with Naomi, but she wound up ending that relationship, that friendship with her sister-in-law that she had had for years. So there's all kinds of different dynamics to think of and consider when you're hearing a story. So all of these stories in the Bible, they're constantly changing and we're constantly learning new things. So even though we've been through Ruth before, don't think, well, I've learned that. We're just gonna, we're just gonna skip it. No, listen and learn. So this week, we're going into the second part and we're gonna turn it over to Tim. Thanks.
Well, good morning and welcome back to Copernicus. And we are, as Sarah said, we are on our second week of Ruth. And we hope that you joined us last week. So we're really excited about this. It was a lot of fun and we got a lot of work to do to get through chapter 2 today. So let's just review what we learned about the Bible last week. The word Bible means book, which is kind of deceiving because the Bible isn't one book. It's actually a library. In your English Bible, it'll be about 66 books. And so it can be pretty stinking intimidating when you first start. You're like, holy cow, there's so much in here. And to be fair, some of the Bible is challenging. When you get to things like Numbers and Leviticus, and there's a whole bunch of names that are hard to pronounce, it is weird and sometimes difficult to understand. But that's why we're here, and that's why you're here, and that's what Copernicus is going to help you do, is understand your Bible and meet the main character of the Bible. So again, what we're here to do, help you read the Bible on your own. So let's review last week. In Ruth chapter 1, we met all the characters, and the two main characters that we're going to talk about are Naomi and Ruth. And so if you remember at the very beginning, Naomi and her family, they had to leave Bethlehem and they went to enemy territory, to people who are not their friends, where they would be refugees in the land called Moab. And Moab had that unfortunate history, and you can go back and watch that last week. And so they moved there hoping to survive a famine that was in Bethlehem. However, while they were in Moab, Naomi's husband died. Naomi's 2 boys died, and she was left with just her daughters-in-law, Orpah and Ruth. And so it was a very sad thing. They have no children, they have no grandchildren, and so these 3 women are now sort of on their own in an agrarian culture where they need sons to take care of them in their old age, but they don't have any. And so Naomi she hears that the famine is done in Bethlehem, and so she's going to go back home. And Orpah and Ruth are going to follow her home, which was customary. It was very kind for them to do that. But remember, when they get to the border, on their way, Naomi says, ladies, there's no reason for you to go back home with me to a foreign country where you're not from. Go back to your parents, go back to your family, to your land, to your gods, and go find a husband because you need children. And so Orpah says, okay, but Ruth doesn't. And you remember, Ruth makes this outrageous promise, and let's just review it real quick. She says, where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will become my people, and your God, my God, and where you die, there I will be buried. So Ruth is going to become a lifelong immigrant, right? And she's going to forsake her heritage. She's going to forsake her religion. She's going to give up the opportunity to be buried with her family. In fact, she is going to be with Naomi even when Naomi dies Ruth's not going to leave her. Ruth's not going to leave her until Ruth dies, and Ruth will be buried beside her. There is no condition, just understand this, there's no condition on Naomi. Naomi can do anything she wants. This is Ruth's promise to do whatever Naomi does. Now, who makes that kind of a crazy, unconditional promise to somebody else? It doesn't make any sense, right? Now, if you remember, we're in the book of Ruth, but to go into Ruth chapter 2, we've got to go backwards in our Bible just a little bit and do some background work. So we do this every time, so you'll get kind of used to it. So we're going to go to the book of Deuteronomy, which is a funny name for a book, right? Deuteronomy actually means second law. And so what had happened is God's people, the Israelites, had left Egypt. Moses had led them out of Egypt, out of captivity. And they were in the desert, and they were getting ready to go into the promised land, Canaan, where our story takes place. They're getting ready to go into the promised land. And Moses gives a big long speech to review the law to a younger generation so they'll know what they need to do when they go into this new land. And the covenant that God had made with them included 613 laws and a whole bunch of regulations, a tabernacle. I mean, it was pretty big. And so Moses, it's a really cool thing. He stands in a valley and they're up on the east side of the mountain, and so it's pretty cool. And he gives this long speech. And here's part of it. So you ready? They're going into a new land, and this is what Moses says. Here you go. When you're harvesting in your field in this new land, and you overlook a sheaf, do not go back to get it. Well, in our world, what does that mean, right? I mean, that's crazy talk. But here's what it is. So this is a sheaf. So when you're when you're harvesting your grain, like a barley or a wheat, what you do is you cut them down at the base, and then you bundle them up and tie them up in a sheaf like this, and then they pile those sheaves up. And so what Moses says, like when you go into the new land, you plant your grains, and you're harvesting your grains, and you're collecting the sheaves from the field. If you leave one out by accident, if one drops off the truck or whatever, don't go back and get it, which is not very good stewardship, right? Why would he say that? Well, good question. Keep reading. Here's what he says. Leave it for the foreigner, the fatherless, and the widow, so that the Lord your God may bless you in all the work of your hands. So he says, look, you're going to forget one. It happens. You're human. When you drop one, or when you leave one, or when you look back and go, oh, look, there's two back there I didn't pick up. Leave them. Don't pick them up. And that gives the people who are foreigners, who are fatherless, and who are widows the opportunity to go and actually pick up those stalks, take them back home. It's not great, but it gives them dignity. They're working for their living. They're not lazy, right? And they're getting it honestly. And so this was their welfare program. And it extended all through this agricultural community. Let's keep reading. Watch this. When you beat the olives from your trees, do not go over the branches a second time. Leave what remains for the foreigner, the fatherless, and the widow. Let's keep reading. When you harvest the grapes in your vineyard, do not go over the vines again. Leave what remains for, you know it by now, the foreigner, the fatherless, and the widow, right? So can you see what God's doing here? He's protecting humans. Not just his humans, not just his chosen people, but foreigners and people without fathers and widows who don't have anybody to take care of them. And so God cares about the marginalized. This is really encouraging for us. And so sometimes people look at the Old Testament and go, God's just mad and wants to kill everybody. That's not what we're seeing here. And so this was the law that God had given to Moses' people. And why were they supposed to do this? Here's why. Remember, you were slaves in Egypt. That is why I command you to do this. So do you remember how it feels to be oppressed? Don't oppress people. Remember how it feels to be enslaved? Don't enslave people. Remember how it feels to be marginalized? Don't let that happen here. There are people who are going to be poor for a variety of reasons. There are people who are foreigners who need to be taken care of for a variety of reasons. And this is God's rules on how to take care of. Now, the practice of foreigners, widows, and fatherless people going out and picking up these sheaves, it's got a name for it. It's called gleaning. So they would go out and they would glean the leftovers, okay? You may have never heard that word before, but it's a good word. You can use it around the water table. What do we call that? Water, whatever. When you're talking at work. There you go. All right, let's keep going. So Ruth chapter 2, now we know about gleaning. Here we go. Now Naomi had a relative on her husband's side, a man of standing from the clan of Elimelech, remember that was her husband, whose name was Boaz. So now we get an introduction to a new main character. Okay, this guy's going to be really interesting. His name is Boaz. Boaz means he has strength within him. So good name, good strong name. And it appears, we'll see, that Boaz is well-to-do. It appears that he's respected in the community. But here's what's really interesting. Remember last week when we talked about Judges and how we said that everybody did whatever was right in their own eyes? Boaz doesn't do that. He is trying to keep the covenant between God and Israel. And so anytime during the book of Judges, when you find somebody trying to do what's right in God's eyes, that's significant. And Boaz is one of those guys. And Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, just stop for a second. I know, but Ruth the Moabite, you see how the writer is characterizing her? The writer is trying to make sure that we remember that Ruth is a foreigner. You see? So it's really important. Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, her mother-in-law, let me go to the fields and pick up the leftover grain behind anyone in whose eyes I find favor. So Ruth says, I'm a foreigner, I'm a widow, we're poor, I'm going to go work. But she's not just going to work for herself. She's going to work for her mother-in-law too. And so she's happy to do it. And so Naomi said to her, go ahead, my daughter. So she went out, entered a random field, and began to glean behind the harvesters. So now you know what that is. What's she doing? She's picking up the leftovers, right? And this is dangerous work. Okay, so it may not sound it, but this is dangerous work, and here's why. First of all, she's a foreigner. She's from Moab, not our friends. Second of all, she's a single young woman working in a field, out in the open, where anybody has access to her. So this could be dangerous for her. On top of that, there might be somebody who wants what she picked up and might be willing to fight her for it, like the people in Walmart do sometimes, right? And on top of that, this is hard work. This is a lot of bending over and carrying everything you pick up. You can't store it over on the side, somebody else will pick it up. So it's hard work. And so Ruth is out gleaning. She's doing hard, dangerous work. As it turned out, I love it when the Bible says this, it's like nobody knew it was going to happen. You can see something's going on. As it turned out, it just so happened that she was working in the field belonging to Boaz, the guy we had talked about earlier, who was of the clan of Elimelech. Now this writer is a good storyteller, okay? He's setting us up. Okay, let's keep reading though, and we'll see what he does. Just then, Boaz arrived from Bethlehem and greeted the harvesters. The Lord be with you. That's what he says. The Lord bless you, they answered. So here's what happens. Boaz comes from Bethlehem. So I thought we were in Bethlehem. Well, we are, but the fields wouldn't be in the city limits. They'd be out in the fields, right? And so Boaz comes in and he calls out to his workers. Now, you imagine people out in the field. He calls out to all his hired hands, goes, the Lord be with you. And they all see their boss and they say, and God bless you too, right? And so but this is an indication that Boaz he's a different kind of person than everybody else. Okay? And so Boaz asked the overseer of his harvesters, who does this young woman belong to? And instantly we all go, belong to? I mean, that's a terrible way to think. But remember, we're not trying to judge what the culture was doing or not doing. What we're trying to do is understand the story as the way it was written. So this young woman, he could have asked it a different way. Is she married? I mean, guys, come on, you ask that all the time. Is she married? Is your friend married? You're asking this same question just a different way. Because if she's married, she belongs to somebody else. She's not available for you, right? And so it's a different kind of thing. So he's really asking, is she married or is she single? And so that would be important to know if he is interested in her, which we all hope that he is, right? The overseer replied, see, you can see it already, can't you? She is the Moabite who came back from Moab, which is what Moabites do, with Naomi. And you can almost hear, the passage doesn't say it, but you can imagine he's like, she's the Moabite, He's just got that, she's from the wrong side of the tracks taste in his mouth, right? She's the Moabite who came back from Moab, it's twice now, with Naomi, okay? And so he's not really thrilled that she's there, but she's there. And people like this, they're not thrilled, the freeloaders, out there, right? And so he's like, it's another Moabite, taking our food, okay? And so he said, and we missed some, oh, nope. I'm sorry, that's messed up right there. Okay, so Boaz said to Ruth, I skipped all over the place, my bad. Boaz said to Ruth, my daughter, listen to me. Don't go and glean in another field, and don't go away from here. Stay here with the women who work for me. Now, this is a remarkable. He's just been told she's a Moabite. Why is he taking an interest in her? He says, first of all, he calls her my daughter, which is a way of saying something nice. It's being kind to somebody. We don't call people our daughter who isn't our daughter. But in their world, this is a way of speaking to someone tenderly. He says, my daughter, listen to me. Don't go and glean in another field, and don't go away from here. Stay here with the women who work for me. So who are the women who work for him? They're a kind of employee. It's really cool what they do is they go after the people who are cutting the grain, and they're the ones who tie it up. And so if you're right behind those women, you're going to be the first one to get all the leftovers. And so he says, don't just not go away, and don't just stay here. Stay behind the people who are going to give you the best opportunity to get food. He says, watch the field where the men are harvesting, and follow along after the women. I have told the men not to lay a hand on you. That's pretty cool. He knows what a man's thinking. Apparently, he already knew what they were thinking. Now, you might think, well, this means that Ruth is beautiful. It might. It might mean that. Or it might mean she was a young Moabite that nobody would miss, that nobody would care about. Nobody's going to investigate that because everybody's doing whatever's right in their own eyes. And Boaz says, not today, not in my field. And so he has removed her from the ranks of a foreign beggar, and he has given her protection. And he's providing all of her basic needs. Now, this was the proper role for a man in this world. You can think it's patriarchal, but he's not being patriarchal here. He's being chivalrous. He could have taken advantage of her too. That would be patriarchal. What the other men might have in mind was patriarchal. She's a woman. What can she say? And Boaz is like, no. And he's doing the right thing because he has a covenant with God. He knows how you're supposed to treat a woman. And this is the culture. In his culture, he was doing the chivalrous thing. And finally, he wraps up like this. He's not just going to provide for her as she goes home, but what about when she's in the field? He says, and whenever you're thirsty, go and get a drink from the water jars that the men have filled. Okay? Again, he's given her protection. He's taking care of her basic needs. This is a good man, and we like him. At this, she bowed down with her face to the ground, and she asked him, why have I found such favor in your eyes that you notice me, a foreigner? This is pretty cool. You can't see it in English, but in Hebrew, the word notice and the word foreigner, they sound alike. They have a similar sound. And so the writer is being clever. He's like, you don't notice foreigners. Foreigners are unnoticeable. And so she's like, and so he puts in her words, says, why have I found favor to be noticed when I am unnoticeable? You see how that works? It's pretty cool. And so Ruth recognizes this as a great kindness from Boaz. We don't know what she was thinking because the Bible doesn't always tell us that, but you can imagine that she might be like going, okay, what's the catch? You know, you're protecting me from them. Why are you protecting me from them? You got plans? We don't know. So Boaz answers her question. The answer is important if we're going to understand the chapter. Okay, so we just pay attention to what Boaz says now. Boaz replied, I've been told all about you, all about what you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband. Okay, so word about Ruth has already gotten around, and Boaz has already heard this. So is it good or bad? Well, we know it's good because we know the story. Has Ruth abandoned her mother-in-law? No, she's out working, taking care of her mother-in-law. And Boaz has heard about that. He's heard about that her husband has passed away. So he's asked around. This probably took place over the course of several days or at least several hours. Boaz asked around. He knows what's going on. Bethlehem's not a big town. It never has been. And so it would have been easy for him to find out about it. But Boaz also knows what you know that Ruth may or may not know yet, and that is that Boaz is a distant relative of Naomi. And so Boaz is already, he's happy that Ruth is helping to take care of his family, and now he's helping to take care of her. And so this is a good thing. It's exactly what you would hope if everything goes right. And he said, I've heard about what you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, how you left your father and mother and your homeland and came to live with a people you did not know. And so he's like, I know your story. You've given up everything. You've given up your heritage. You've given up the right to be buried with your mother and father. You've given up the right to be called a citizen. You've given up everything that you know, all your gods and everything. And you've come to live with a brand new people who aren't like you, who in many cases don't even like you, right? And so you've done that, and you did that for my relative, for Naomi. Although he doesn't say my relative yet, but that's where he's going with it. And he's like, and I am so grateful that you've done that. Now the next verse is the one that's going to tell us how to understand not just this chapter, but the rest of the book. So verse 12, may the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. Now this is super important. This is the most important verse in this chapter, and this verse is going to be super important later in the series. So you need to remember this. So we just need to stop and talk about it for a second. So first of all, there's some things that you notice, and if you've been with us in Copernicus for a while, you'll notice this, and if you haven't, let me teach you. Anytime, especially we're using the NIV, so in most of your modern translations, when you see capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D, that's a note for us, the English reader, that we are looking at the name of God, Yahweh, which means I am who I am. And so God uses that special name. Now God has all kinds of titles, which are pretty cool. But this is his personal name. This is what he calls himself, the Lord. I am who I am. When he uses that, that's always in talking about his covenant relationship with somebody. Okay? In this case, it's his covenant relationship with his people Israel, of whom Boaz is a part. And so Boaz invokes God's covenant name. He says, may Yahweh repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by Yahweh, the God of Israel, who is now your God, because remember you said that your God, that Naomi's God would become your God. And then he says this, he goes, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. Now, obviously, he doesn't think God has wings, okay? That's silly. But we know that in the tabernacle, in the back of the tabernacle, in the holiest place of all, there was the Ark of the Covenant. You remember seeing that on Raiders of the Lost Ark, right? There's the Ark of the Covenant, and God dwelled between the two cherubim, and the two cherubim had wings. So there's two sculptured cherubim. And so if you happen to be under those wings, what could touch you? Nothing, right? Even the priest couldn't touch you except one time of the year when he would go in. You were totally safe there. And so this is a way of saying if you're under God's wings, you're under God's protection. And if you were in covenant with God, like the Israelites were, and you were keeping that covenant, then you were safe. You're safe from your enemies, safe from famine, and those sorts of things. So it's a word picture. And you can think of it a different way, like when a chicken, mother chicken grabs all of her baby chicks and puts them under her wing to protect them from whatever's outside, whatever's dangerous. And so if that helps you think about it, it's the same kind of word picture. But this phrase, we're going to come back to it next week, and you'll see it's really, really cool how this works in the story. Let's keep reading. May I continue to find favor in your eyes, Lord, she said. You have put me at ease by speaking kindly to your servant, though I do not have the standing of one of your servants. Okay, again, English fails us a little bit. So the first thing is, you see this word Lord? There's no caps. That just means sir, or, and to be a little more harsh, master. But it would be like our sir, okay? And she says, I hope this keeps up, sir. Says, and you've put me at ease. This phrase is interesting because it's literally, you've spoken to my heart. Now that's romantic. That would be in a Hallmark movie for sure, right? And she says, you've spoken to my heart. This is really important. By speaking kindly to your servant, though I do not have the standing of one of your servants. Looks like it's the same word, doesn't it? But it's not. The first servant describes the lowest level of female servant. So female servants had different names for them than male servants. And so she said, you spoke kindly to me, the lowest female servant that you have. Though I do not have the standing of one of your, and this servant refers to a higher class of servants. And that'll become important later. So it's really cool, just the language. She knows how to talk to this man, and this man is obviously, he's got an interest in her. Maybe something more than just making sure she's safe because she's family. But that remains to be seen. Let's keep reading. At mealtime, Boaz said to her, come over here, have some bread and dip it in the wine vinegar. So he's like, come over and get something to eat, okay? And so he's going to give her something to eat. Now, there were masters who fed their servants. That's not unusual. So, but Boaz takes a special interest in her and says, you come over and eat. Probably, he's like saying, sit near me, right? Can you see that? And then when she sat down with the harvesters, he offered her some roasted grain, and she ate all she wanted and had some left over. So she's eating with the harvesters, but what it sounds like is that Boaz is serving her. She's a servant. Boaz. Now, we don't know that's what happened. We just know what the passage says. But if the master, if the boss comes and sits down beside the newest person on the team and gives them some of his food, not just some, but all she wanted and some left over, that's pretty significant. Can you imagine the gossip about that? There's going to be a conversation out in the field a little later on that. And actually the word where he offered her, he heaped up to her. He stacked it, made it high so she had plenty to eat, and so much so that she had some left over. As she got up to glean, Boaz gave orders to his men. Let her gather among the sheaves and don't reprimand her. So he's like, she can pull from wherever she wants. So if she accidentally pulls something that really doesn't belong to the gleaners, say nothing about it. Nothing at all. I don't care how much she gets. That's crazy, right? And so, and the word here has to do with humiliate. So don't embarrass her. It's not just don't tell her not to do it. Don't go, you're stupid. That's not where you're supposed to get stuff from. He's not even letting them do that. So nothing, okay? Even, he says to his servants, he says, even pull out some stalks from the bundles and leave them for her to pick up. And do not rebuke her. This is amazing. Like, this is a businessman. He has given up some of his profits, because I'm sure his workers are really good. He's given up some of his profits for one foreign woman. That's crazy. Who does that? That's awesome, right? Now, just stop for a second. Just think for just a second. Does this sound patriarchal? Well, I mean, I guess you could do it, but what does this sound like? It sounds like a romance. It sounds like this guy is taking care of a woman who needs his help. Not because she's a woman, but because she's experienced a set of circumstances that were unfortunate. So, Ruth gleaned in the field until evening. Then she threshed the barley that she had gathered, and it amounted to about an ephah. Okay, so she gleans in the field. She works all day, and then she threshed the barley she had gathered. I'll show you that in a little bit. And it amounted to about an ephah. Actually, we'll talk about threshing next week. It's really cool. But let's talk about how much she walked away with. So she's walking away with about 30 pounds of barley. That represented probably a week, maybe as much as 2 weeks worth of food for two women in that world. And so this is amazing. And of course, how do you think Naomi is going to respond to this? I mean, it's going to be not a bad thing, right? So she carried it back to town, and her mother-in-law saw how much she had gathered. And Ruth also brought out and gave her what she had left over after she had eaten enough. So Ruth she's bright, okay? She's like, I've got leftovers from lunch. I'm going to save those just in case I need them later. But she didn't need them later, did she? Because she got a week's worth in a day of gleaning. But she brings it all back and gives it all to Naomi, which means that Naomi has food that she can eat right then that she doesn't have to prepare, which is really cool. But she brings out, this so shows she hit the jackpot, right? And so this is how Naomi responds. Her mother-in-law asked her, where did you glean today? Well, where did you work? Blessed be the man who took notice of you. So obviously, this did not happen by accident. Whoever it was gave you this extra food at lunchtime. This is a good man, okay? So this is a woman who recognized what a good man looks like. And what's the definition of good based on? Well, it's a man who's trying to keep God's covenant, so it's God's definition of good. Then Ruth told her mother-in-law about the one at whose place she had been working. The name of the man I worked with today is Boaz, she said. So she tells her the whole story about the whole day and what this guy did, and then she ends it with, oh, and by the way, his name is Boaz. The Lord bless him, Naomi said to her daughter-in-law. He has not stopped showing his kindness to the living and the dead. Now this is a remarkable verse. Remember how we left Naomi last week? Remember she comes back to Bethlehem and they go, ooh, it's Naomi. She says, don't call me Naomi anymore. Naomi means pleasant. You call me Mara from now on because God has made my life bitter. Remember that? She had a bad attitude. She was angry at God and she believed in God and she believed God had made her life miserable. That God had not stopped the circumstances, had not taken care of. But she was missing some things. She was missing the fact that there was no famine in Bethlehem anymore. She could come back home, and that her daughter-in-law, who was young and could work, had come back home with her. She missed those things. But now we're starting to see a transformation in her attitude. She recognizes that something good has happened, and who is she blaming it on? God. The Lord bless him. God has not stopped showing his kindness to the living and the dead. Who are the living? Well, she and Ruth. Who are the dead? Their family. This man is a relative of their family, and he is blessing his extended family because of his covenant with God. This is a really cool thing. But this is where the story takes a turn. You ready? It's fun times. She added, hey, this man is our close relatives. He is one of our guardian redeemers. Now, some of you will have a Bible that says kinsman redeemer, and some of you may have a Bible that just says guardian or a family guardian. And so we're going to talk about this. So this term is a very special term, and it's a really cool thing that happened in their world. And it wasn't just in the Bible world, it was in the entire Middle Eastern world. So in Israel, though, God's plan for humanity was that families would help each other. Okay? Now, I live in the South. I don't know where you are, but I live in the South, and we still have that policy. You know, we have that whole thing, you know, blood is thicker than water and all that stuff. So you do anything for your family that you won't do for other people. And so God kind of was on that same page. And so he wanted to make sure that families took care of each other. And so there was a very special situation that God gave very special instruction and took special care of families. And so we're going to go back to that book with the funny name Deuteronomy. And this is still Moses. He's still talking, and he's saying what to do in this special situation. So let me read it to you, okay? If brothers are living together and one of them dies without a son, his widow must not marry outside the family. Now, at first, this just sounds harsh. What, she's supposed to be a widow for the rest of her life if there's nobody else that wants to marry her? No, this is a very specific rule. So here's what's understood in the passage. So I told you about my brother and I last week. In our situation, if I married a woman, I'm the oldest, if I married a woman and I died without a son, I don't have a male heir that can work the land and can reproduce and have more children with my name. And so it would be, under this rule, it would be my brother's job to marry my widow and produce for her one son. Once a son had been born, then he was not required to do anything else because she would have someone that could take care of her in her old age. Remember, the Social Security in the Middle East is a little different than here. And so the reason is we do not want the dead man's name to be lost. Okay? That's important, but there's more reasons than that. We'll talk about that in just a second. Her husband's brothers shall take her and marry her and fulfill the duty of a brother-in-law to her. The first son she bears shall carry the name of the dead brother so that his name will not be blotted out. So you can see how this works. I'm going to perpetuate this man's name even though he died without an heir. Okay? So there's all kinds, you can imagine, there's all kinds of difficulties. For instance, my brother is already married. So what would happen in this situation? Can he marry another woman? Well, maybe, but probably not. But there is but in Ruth and Naomi's situation, both the brothers died. There's no opportunity for this. So in their world, an extended relative could pick up the job of a brother-in-law. And this arrangement had a cool name, and it's called Levirate marriage. And so Levirate in Hebrew means brother. Okay? And so an extended family member, if a brother was not available, could pick up this opportunity and take care of this man's family for him. It did one more thing. In the Jewish world, land was given to them by God, and it had to stay in the family. So to sell your land or to give it away, that just didn't happen. You were expected to be a good steward of the land, the promised land that God had given you. And so A Levirate marriage would allow a brother to help his brother out by extending his name, and it would help keep that land in the family and tribe that it belonged to. Does that make sense? So, now, for us, this is like, we would never marry our brother's. I mean, that's way out of our. I mean, that only makes for bad Netflix shows, right? We wouldn't do that. For us, it sounds awful, but for them, in their world and their time, in an agrarian culture, this is what made sense, and it was an act of mercy. Okay, so the person who did this would be called a goel. Okay. Or that just means kinsman redeemer or guardian or a family guardian. Okay? Now here's the problem. In the case of Ruth, there are a lot of questions. What if Ruth doesn't like the person that's going to be her goel? Or what if the person who wants to be her goel doesn't even know if that's what she wants or that's what she's available, right? You may think, well, she's a woman, she has to do it. Well, apparently not. And we'll find that out a little later on, but apparently not. So there's going to have to be a time when everybody agrees that the goel is acceptable to both the goel and the kinsman redeemer and the woman being redeemed. And we haven't had that yet. So this is what, let's keep reading. We're almost done. Let's keep reading. Here we go. Then Ruth the Moabite, see again? Then the Ruth the Moabite said, well, Boaz even said to me, stay with my workers until they finish harvesting my grain. And now here the way that she's talking about servants is a different word than before. This one is stay with my male servants. Okay? How do you think Naomi's going to hear that? Danger, Will Robinson, right? I mean, she's like, no, baby, no. And that's what Naomi says. Naomi said to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, not Ruth the Moabite. See how Ruth is thinking about her as family? And everybody else is thinking about her as a Moabite. Naomi said to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, it will be good for you, my daughter, to go with the women who work with him, because in someone else's field you might be harmed. You see how it's subtle? She's like, so Naomi changes the word to the feminine word for servant and says, hey, yeah, stay in his field because that's good, but stay with the women. Now, if you're a father or a mother, you've had this conversation with your daughter. This makes perfect sense. She's concerned for her daughter's safety. And so she's subtly, but not so much, reminding her, don't hang out with the men. That's not safe, baby. So Ruth stayed close to the women of Boaz to glean until the barley and the wheat harvests were finished, and she lived with her mother-in-law. Now, barley was harvested from late March through late April, and wheat from late April through late May. And so she was able to glean fields for, several months, right? And so she was well taken care of for several months before winter sets in. And she stayed with her mother-in-law. All right, so let's wrap this up here for a second, okay? Let's think about this. What does this have to do with anybody, with me or you today? So last week we talked about how sometimes we can find ourselves very angry with God. Maybe he didn't heal somebody. Maybe he didn't get me the job I wanted. Maybe I lost the job that I had that was really good. Or maybe I'm divorced or broke up with my friend, whatever it is, right? I mean, it could be anything. Maybe your children are gone crazy, and you're like, why hasn't God come through? And so we feel like that he's let us down. Or maybe that he's just, abandoned us. We're all alone. It's just me against the world. Nobody loves me. Everybody hates me, And that's the way we feel. And sometimes when we get there, rather than running to him, we just like, well, if he's not going to pay attention to me, then forget him. And we leave him out of our lives because we think that he's done us wrong. And Naomi felt that way last week. She said, the Lord has made me bitter. But here's the cool thing. Boaz is already thinking about Ruth as family just because of her extended relationship to Naomi. But there might be more. But he's already thinking about her as family. He's already taken care of her like family. Not like a slave, not like a servant, not like a Moabite, but like a brother or a sister. Just the way he would a sister. So I don't know where you are with your relationship with God, or if you're even interested in having a relationship with him, or even if you believe in him. You may find yourself anywhere on that spectrum. And I don't know what conversations you've had with God. Here's what I find kind of funny. When I talk to people who don't believe in God, they almost always tell me they talked to Him at some point in time, and then they didn't believe in Him. And I find that interesting because we're built to have a relationship with God, and that's why you want to talk to Him, and sometimes why you want to yell at Him. And He's a big boy, He can handle that, right? And so wherever you find yourself in that spectrum, just know this: God has already started thinking of you as family. And He already has a plan to be your Goel, to be your guardian redeemer. And we'll see that even in this book. And we'll talk more about that and other things next week when we read chapter 3. Hope you join us then. Let me pray with you. Well, Father, we are grateful for your love and for this time together. And as we think about the story of Ruth, it challenges us all because at some point in time, most of us have probably found ourselves a little angry at you, thinking that maybe you've done the wrong thing or let us down. But as we think about this, open our hearts. Help us think about the possibility of a new or renewed relationship with the one who is our guardian redeemer. And it's in His name, in Jesus' name, that we pray. Amen.